Hi, and welcome to another episode of Freshwaves. I'm your host, Bren Masson. Today, we're going to be continuing our writing series by speaking with author extraordinaire Lyndi Allison. And Lyndi is self-published, but she's really amazing at how she has researched from the beginning how to do this on her own and is very motivated to do it on her own. She used to teach English. She still teaches in her writing workshops and writing groups. She teaches not only how to put together a good thought, but how to make that thought actually more presentable to the world around you. Today we're going to talk with Lyndi about her new books and also about writing by yourself and writing with others. There are pros and cons to both, and I think Lyndi is unique in this opportunity because she has done both and sees the benefits of both. Good morning, Lyndi, and welcome to Fresh Waves.
Thank you, Brenda. It's a delight to be chatting with you again about writing.
Well, we always seem to have great conversations, and I think our listeners learn a lot from our organic conversations. Okay, we've done a little bit of research before we get into these topics, but we kind of let the conversation flow, and I think that's the way good writing happens too, doesn't it? It just has a starting point, and then there is a flow.
Sometimes. Sometimes it feels a little like chiseling it out of stone. But that's why we're going to be sharing this topic today, so that when we get to that place when we're writing on our own and then we write together, it helps us to get back into that flow by keeping those appointments with others and, feeding off of each other's creative energy.
Okay, now before we get started, we'll say that writing alone and you're trying to put together a book or, trying to get out a poem that just doesn't come flowing out as easily as it should. There are some formulas to writing alone. Some famous authors have said that they need to write every day for 4 hours, and it's 4 uninterrupted hours. I look at that and think, whoa, wouldn't that be nice?
It sure would.
Life just gets in the way sometimes. But then writing in community, as we will refer to it many times throughout this interview, is actually writing with others, but not necessarily showing what you have written to just any of your friends and family. We're writing with others, and we're actually meaning others in the writing community.
Agreed. And I think the other aspect of that in sharing what we have written, we're identifying for each other what is working in the writing. And so when something's working really well in someone else's writing, I'm learning from their experience. And hopefully they're learning from mine as well.
Uh-huh. And sometimes when you show things to friends, it can be counterproductive because they're not looking at it in the same light. Agreed.
The thing that I've really enjoyed about friends, though, is that they can be great cheerleaders. Sometimes you just need someone to read what you're writing and just have someone cheer for you, because it's a bit of a process and we go through many revisions and we need to hear afterwards what's not working in the piece and rewrite and edit. And, it's not a bad thing to have some of those friends come along and be your cheerleaders and just really enjoy what they say.
Yeah, I actually gave a piece that I had written and submitted to a magazine to a friend before I submitted it, and she returned it to me saying, I really like it, and she rewrote the entire piece.
Yeah, I guess in that case I would say, that's someone who hasn't understood yet that each of us has our own unique voice. Mm-hmm. And when we respond to a piece, we need to be listening for that voice. And often our responses are almost like questions or suggestions about, what maybe is unclear to us. And, that kind of feedback is fabulous. But it's really, really critical that we don't rewrite other people's writing, because our unique voice comes from when we are very young. It comes out of the life we had as a child, and it comes out of the practice writing. And then to have someone come along and rewrite it can be very discouraging. I've had that happen with an editor who rewrote a piece of mine. And I had to set it aside for quite a long period of time. I couldn't get their voice out of my head. And I kind of felt self-critical that my voice wasn't good enough. And so, understanding your own unique voice is a very important part of it.
And I think that's where writing in community of writers comes in very handy. I just have to say that the barking in the background was the dogs. They thought they wanted to participate in the conversation this morning. So I let them have their piece. As a matter of fact, there's actually nothing I can do to keep them from barking when they think that somebody's here. But we will just ignore that because what you were saying was very interesting. And I think we have friends that we can share everything with, and sometimes you have to have set boundaries with them and say, look, I'm showing this to you more for general interest, or I'm showing this to you, what do you think? And some people are good at that kind of thing, and some people just aren't. So when you're writing in community with other writers, I think they're more in tune with letting your natural voice come through. It's kind of the same as if you and I were to read a book and I loved it and you didn't. Doesn't mean the book's not any good. It doesn't mean that I have awful taste in literature. It just means that for some reason that story resonated with me and it may not have resonated with you, or vice versa.
I think with any written piece, there is what the author brings. Obviously, they are reaching often inside them, even if it's fiction. There are biographical elements that come out. So they bring something in the writing process to the story. But there is absolutely no control that the writer or author has over people's response to it. There isn't a single piece of writing anywhere that absolutely everyone has loved. And that's because readers also bring a piece. Mm-hmm. And so, when they read something that's, the same as someone else, their response can be completely different. And I think you're exactly right. When it resonates, it's because there's some ring of truth and there's some experience that the reader is drawing on that they're bringing to the piece and giving them the understanding. And then others may not have that, or it might just not be their cup of tea, right? We all like different genres, different pacing. Some people love lots of description. Some people skip through the description,
Yep.
So it's both what the writer writes and what the reader brings to the piece, and that's what brings the response. But of course, writers do love it.
Yeah.
When it does resonate with someone, of course, right? And
Yep.
That's, one of the reasons we write, and it's very encouraging.
That's one of the reasons why book clubs are so popular, is because somebody may read the same book and not really like it. Other people read it, love it. Then they get together and they talk about it. And maybe the ones who love it may say, well, I see why you may not have liked that, So there's always room for discussion, even when everybody reads the same piece.
And that's a great place for a writer to go to see that, right? It gives them, the exact reactions that they would get from their writing. And that's a whole variety. Some people love it. That's the best book I've ever read. And others are like, not so much for me. But, you make a really excellent point about hearing other people's points of view. This is how, we grow as people. We can develop so much compassion for characters in a story. And when we do that, we're developing compassion for people as well. And also understanding that, we don't necessarily fit with all people in the same way, right? And that's okay,
Mm-hmm.
But it's the opportunity to listen, to understand, to hear another point of view, and then to, just appreciate that, we're not all the same.
Right. So tell me about your writing journey. Did you start writing by yourself?
I did. I started so many years ago, Brenda. My journey's been so long to get here. So I hope my long journey will encourage others. Way back when my kids were little, I thought that I might like to write for magazines. So I took a course, and of course I was raising kids. I was operating a business. And back then, I would submit my lessons by mail, and then I'd wait for a really, 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 really long time for the response to come. It was like weeks and weeks. And by then, my writing had been done quite a time prior. And it was a really slow process of getting some kind of response. So that was hard for me. That was really hard for me. But it, like everything, right? It's part of my journey and part of my learning experience. Yeah, but that's where I started. And it was very lonely, very lonely. I didn't know any other writers. I really wasn't getting a sense of, whether my writing was, had any potential, which of course all starting places of writing are places of potential. But I didn't know that at the time.
And a lot of magazines just simply send you, sorry, at this time, we will not be using your piece. They don't give you any feedback as to why. It may not have anything to do with your writing. It may only have to do with their magazine and what their theme is for this particular moment in time. So it's disheartening because you really don't have any idea where you're at.
Definitely. And not being a part of a writers group or writing in community, I didn't understand the query, submit your work, rejection process. And, sometimes it's just a matter of you've got a great article, but we recently published one similar to it, or it's not just the right fit for our magazine. I was fortunate enough to get a couple of responses back then that said, we really enjoyed your piece. Please submit it somewhere else. We can see it fitting somewhere. It's just not right for us at this time. So, but again, it's just kind of like, okay, what do I do with this now? And it was just that I didn't know, or I didn't have a place where I could go to learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or I didn't understand there were places to go to learn.
So how did you find out about the places to learn and the places to share and grow in a community of writers?
Well, as it turned out, my husband's employment took us to Ontario, and I was living in the Durham region at that time. And very fortunate for me, there is a community of writers there called the Writers Community of Durham Region. I was still really busy at that time. I was still running a business. I was going to school. I was raising 3 kids. But I went once a month to their breakfast meetings. And I started to hear from other writers. And I started to realize that, mostly what I was lacking was some guidance and some encouragement from flesh and blood people instead of, a little note on a piece of paper. And I received that there. And I'm really, really grateful for that.
So you just, I'm not going to say Googled because I don't know how long ago it was, but you just looked up writing groups and picked one?
To be honest, I don't have a full recollection of how I became aware of the group. It could have been, I was taking creative writing in the university. It could have been through one of my classes. And then I decided to attend a meeting. And from there, I became aware that they offered many, many different kinds of growth experiences. And it was still slow going for me back then because I wasn't doing enough of the application. At that point, I was starting to learn a lot more about it. But I was really too busy to go home and work it and practice it and grow in it. So this is what I mean about a slow journey. But at least I was learning. So when I got to the place where I could spend some time and develop, I had a basis that I could work from.
Hmm. Okay. So you go into a group. Did you feel really intimidated with other writers there at first?
Very much so. I sat at the table and I didn't say very much, and I really didn't network. I was a little bit intimidated by the whole process, and over time, I started to get to know some of the individuals, and some of the individuals offered workshops that I attended, and then I got to know people a little bit better, and I was learning from them. At some point, I actually joined the board of that organization to give back. And so I got to see a little bit more of the inner workings and kind of hear the heart of the group, what they were hoping for the writers. That was wonderful for me to learn about, how much time they volunteered and offered from their knowledge base to help other writers. That was really amazing.
It sounds amazing. It sounds like I want to go out and join that group.
You might.
Now, through that group, were you introduced then to the AWA method of writing, which is the
Amherst Writers and Artists method? Yes, that's exactly how I was introduced. I met Sue Reynolds through the organization, and at that time, she was offering free workshops in the method. I didn't realize it was the method back then. I was just attending her groups, and she was giving us prompts, and I was writing really, really badly. But the group was very good about, finding something in the piece that was working. And that was many years ago. And, some of those little writing pieces ended up finding their way into my third book.
Wow.
So, you just never know, in these writing environments, sometimes you think you're just practicing, but there were seeds of the story, and they actually form a part of the plot of book 3 in my trilogy. So, years later, that writing came out in a new way, but the ideas and some of the characters were there back then.
So when someone is just starting out in their writing journey, maybe they started out journaling and then they decided that some of the stories that they were writing, and of course, everyday life for all of us is a story, isn't it? You go to the shopping center and you're doing groceries and you see an interaction between two people, and if you write about it, it is a story. And you tell someone about it and it's a story. So when somebody starts journaling, then they start realizing they have some interesting stories, so they start writing down little things. Would you encourage them to go, and if they are enjoying what they're doing, to go and find one of these groups?
I would definitely encourage it. It's just a beautiful way to learn and to grow and to apply. And I don't want to, say it's all heavenly. Sometimes, there are people there. When people get together, sometimes there's conflicts that you have to work through, and that's not a bad thing either. And sometimes it takes a little while to find the right group for you. But in each of these opportunities, you learn something from people, and you apply it or not, and you grow in your own way. I think the thing that I learned the most from those groups is that all writers and authors have a journey, and I appreciated hearing about other authors' journeys, and I learned from them, but their journey is not my journey. Mm-hmm. I come from a different place, and my journey is going to be unique to me, and I am very grateful for what I learned from them. Many things I apply, and other things I haven't applied, or maybe I just haven't applied yet. Or, sometimes people's journeys are enhanced by the connections they have. And so they were given opportunities, or sometimes their journey is changed by maybe what's going on in their life. People have extenuating life circumstances, right, that play into their journey. and also determine how much time they have. And, it's just going with an open mind and realizing that you don't have to take everything. Just find that thing that you need in that moment and, work on that step. There's always going to be more to learn. And there will either be time for it or not, but you'll grow as far as you can with the time you have.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, I agree with you, and I think that finding the right group and the right groove for you is paramount to having a good writing experience. And don't let one bad writing experience ruin your writing forever. I mean, all of us have the story of the one teacher who said, well, that writing isn't worth putting on paper. And that's, and then I've never written since then. For me, it was drawing. I can't draw. Okay, you're not supposed to say that. I can draw, but you don't want to see what I've drawn. And I was told that more than once in my days at school. But I hear, in a way, that artists who draw see. So, we all have our specialties. We all have our special gifts. And sometimes writing doesn't have to be for anybody else other than you.
There's a great value in just writing for either the therapeutic reasons or the enjoyment or possibly leaving, stories just for your family. There are many, many different reasons for writing. And, that's a great thing because you don't have to, be out there trying to pitch your book. You don't have to go the indie route that I've gone. You don't have to do any of those steps unless those are the ones that are right for you. So it's about finding your own path.
Right. Yep. Well, we're going to take our first break here on Fresh Waves. And when we come back, we'll continue our discussion with Lyndi, and we'll find out about not only her first trilogy of young adult books, but her second trilogy and new launch. I'm so excited for you, and I'm so excited to hear about your new endeavors. This is Fresh Waves. I'm your host, Bren Masson. This morning we're speaking with Lyndi Allison, author and self-publisher of 2 trilogies. We'll be right back, so stay tuned. You're listening to Fresh Waves. I'm your host, Bren Masson. Remember, if you'd like to hear this show again, you can check out our YouTube channel at Fresh Waves Radio. Now let's get back to the show. We're back on Fresh Waves. I'm your host, Bren Masson. Today we're speaking with Lyndi Allison. She's an author and self-publisher of young adult science fiction or science fantasy. There is a difference, but it's kind of a loose difference. So I'm going to say, okay, science fantasy. And in that, Lyndi, you actually invent worlds. That's amazing.
Yes. It's actually, a really fun part of the writing. And I'm often inspired by things in my world, but, I get to push them and, the fantasy side, take them outside of how things actually happen in our real world. And yet the stories are rooted in, real lives, things that are happening that would happen to individuals in our world. So I get to play with it a little bit.
That sounds great. So you've got world building, they call it. I mean, there are games where you world build. There are video games where you world build. But you actually put pen to paper and invent new places, new creatures. I mean, basically, it's an empty slate, and you can fill it with whatever you choose because it is something you've created from scratch.
Yes, the essence of world building is in setting up certain parameters where you actually keep the rules of that world. But in terms of what the worlds will be, you get to invent those. And I often do that by just what I'm inspired by here. And an example of that would be I'm a big beach walker. So Often on the beaches, I find shells, I find sea glass. I enjoy the pieces of driftwood and the shapes that they are. Well, in my second book, there are 5 islands. One of them is entirely an island of driftwood. One's entirely an island of shells. One's entirely an island of the rocks that I find. And they play into the story. So my characters have to visit each of these islands and find a key on each of these islands to open a door in an underwater world. One of my favorite parts of that world building was the Oracle's house has a sea glass ceiling. So when the light shines through, it's all these different colors of lights in her home when she's sharing these prophetic words. And this is kind of, the way I'm taking some of the natural elements here and then using them to create something new and having a lot of fun doing that.
Wow, that sounds fantastic. I mean,
Thank you.
The way you talk about it, I want to read it just to see those worlds. So you did say that you are a beach walker, so I will tell the listeners that you actually live in Panama.
Yes, I'm very fortunate. I'm in a beach town here, so I can walk the beach in the morning, and within 45-minute drive, I can be at a trailhead and hiking in the mountains. So I kind of have a really sweet spot.
You certainly do. You certainly do. And a good inspiration for a lot of your writing. You have lived in Ontario. You've lived in other parts of Canada. You've actually now live in Panama, but you've visited a number of different places before you settled in Panama. So you have lots of life experience to draw on. And I think that's always great for an author, isn't it?
I think so too. I think pretty much everyone has, a different kind of experience that they can bring. You do not have to live in a place like I live. You can be in your office at home and be inspired. So an example would be, I have a children's picture book that I wrote quite a number of years ago that I'm revising right now. And it was actually inspired by a James Lumber painting. He's a painter who lives, I believe, in Whitby, Ontario. And his picture, Captain's Quarters, hung above my desk. And it's a picture of a little boy dressing up in his grandpa's nautical gear, the captain's hat. There's a trunk there full of nautical items. And that was the inspiration for a children's story, nautical story. So, you can take just about anything and be inspired by it if you're willing to, explore it.
Yeah. Isn't that neat? I guess that's sometimes in the writing when they have prompts, those prompts can inspire us to go into a place of creativity that we might not have otherwise gone into. So again, another plug for writing with others as well as writing by yourselves, because sometimes, when you're writing by yourself, you can get into that writer's freeze where you just don't want to write about anything. And then when you go to a group setting and you're writing together, you may be more motivated in some ways to get past that block.
I really truly believe there is something called creative energy. When people come together, even if they don't feel ready to write something on the page, I've often come to writing group and I thought, maybe I shouldn't go today because my brain is blank, or I'm tired, or, I've got a busy brain, and I'm always amazed at what I come away with. And as you well know, right, when we give these writing prompts, every single writer writes something completely unique to them, and they all go off in a different direction. And it's just just another reminder of how, the same material, because of what we bring to it, produces something else. And it's just a very beautiful experience to share.
Yeah, I think so too. I think you're right. So tell us about the beginnings of your first trilogy.
Okay, so my first trilogy, again, I told you I'm a slow writer, so I'm going to verify that again. I wrote very small introduction to my very first book in my 4th year of university. Now, I was older when I went to university, so it kind of percolated there for a while. And when I went to actually start writing, I picked up on the seeds of that. It's very different from what I wrote back in university, but the seeds of it are still there. And it's a great thing to just write what's on your mind to write at the time. And, if you don't use it at that time, you might or you might not use it later, or a piece of it might find its way into something. So at that time, I had in my brain that I would like to write an adaptation of A Wrinkle in Time. I quite like the book. It's science fantasy, which is what, I have written. Now, I strayed a long, long way from that and let go of much of that, but that's how my book began. And, all these years later, now that I have published my first trilogy, one of the responses I'm getting to my work is the work sort of resonates with A Wrinkle in Time, even though it has nothing to do with that adaptation other than, the story happens out in space like that one did. And so it's just kind of interesting for me to see how that evolved. So I sort of took A Wrinkle in Time and I kind of mushed it with Rick Riordan's Lightning Thief later on because the kids really loved the Greek myth in that story. And I thought, well, I'm going to try to write a story for the next age group because A Wrinkle in Time and The Lightning Thief are middle grade. I decided I'd like to write I call it a young YA book because YA has, young teens, but also teens that are more mature. So, mine's almost a crossover, or even is a crossover between middle grade and young adult. And I just played. I played with those. I lopped off the first, I think, 3 or 4 chapters at one time, totally got rid of those, started again, practiced. And ultimately, I hope I told a compelling story. My students used to go to the library when it was time to pick a novel, and they'd go to the back of the book and they'd go, "Ooh, that sounds like a good story, but there's more than 200 pages. That's a lot of work." So I tried to write compelling stories that were, less than that. And I hope I've achieved that. I certainly have had some good responses to that idea. And, you give your character a little bit of a backstory, a problem. My main character, his baby sister has died, and he wasn't able to prevent that. And now he's in space trying to prevent the death of alien children. So it deals with really important issues like grief and how to process that. It motivates him, and sometimes in not good ways, because he makes choices trying to prevent something and causes more trouble. And, I kind of enjoyed that story arc. I gave him a rival who thinks completely different. So that goes back to what you and I were talking about, the difference in points of view. Mm-hmm. He's very interested in astronomy and math, and Gloria is very interested in story and the Greek myths. And both those things play into the story.
Right. You wrote 3 books. Did you have the whole story of the trilogy all in your head at one time, or did it kind of unfold as you went along?
It definitely unfolded as I went along. I am what I would call a very, very loose outliner. So I plot out the sort of what we call the 3-act structure. I provide an inciting incident, and there's a lot of, rising action based on the choices that the characters make. And so I just hit on those plot points, but I'm not really sure how it'll play out. And I actually just had a very interesting development from one of my critiquers when she got to the end of book 6. And she said to me, "You brat, you knew all along that's where you were going to end the story." And I said, "I actually didn't. I didn't know until I turned the last page to write it, that it was going to be."
Wow. Well, that's interesting.
So I'm sort of a little bit of an outliner and a little bit of a intuitive writer in between.
So you have the first trilogy and it's all published and out in the world. And now you are launching the second trilogy.
Yes. So the first trilogy is the Summer Triangle trilogy. And I decided after I wrote that one, I brought that to what could be a complete close or it could continue. And I decided to wait on my readers to see if they were asking for more. And when that happened, I decided to write the second trilogy with the same characters, but a completely different story arc. So the characters in the second trilogy, which is the Winter Hexagon trilogy, are all about the main character going to different planets to find the seeds that he needs to help heal his mom's cancer, because those seeds aren't available on Earth. And of course, they encounter all kinds of challenges and difficulties. And in their different ways of looking at things, the co-protagonists have to, work together to see if they can get these seeds and get home in time before Jace's mother dies. So, and, when you've hung around on 6 planets, there's a little bit of romance possibly developing there as well. I won't give you any spoilers as to how that goes.
No, but that's actually, again, what I find a lot in your writing is very relatable instances. It's not relatable when some giant monster comes down and gives them a hard time, but it's relatable, the interpersonal relationships that happen at that age. And I don't think in your books there's nothing shocking that's going to upset parents or readers. It's just nice interactions between people of that age. And I think that's really important when you're writing YA.
Thank you. And I think in terms of writing the younger YA, some of those things can be explored more as you get into the older characters who are YA. But at that, when you're just 13 to 15, you can write about just about anything, but you have to write it in a way that's appropriate for that age group.
Yeah. And you were a teacher previous to this. You had a lot of lives, my dear, but you were a teacher, so you're very sensitive to that kind of thing. And you worked with that age group, so you are familiar with their language. And I think that also comes very clear in your book, the way you say things and the insults when someone's chiding somebody else. And you get this really fun look at that age group, and always in a respectful and fun way, which I really enjoy about your books.
Well, thank you. I taught high school, so I taught a lot of grade 9 and 10, and I also volunteered with that age group, so I got to see them outside of the school environment. And I met a lot of young people who were grieving or who had, illnesses in their family or many life issues that, my characters experience. And I have found, in sharing stories in the classroom and other places, that gives them a place to see themselves in the story, maybe to understand some of the feelings they're going through are quite normal. It's normal to be angry, when these things are going on. And, it's normal sometimes for young people to not make the best choice based on their emotions or their hormones or various other things. This is a part of what their life is like. Mm-hmm. And, one can hope that in the story there is encouragement for them. Encouragement to understand themselves and others better. And I have a really, really deeply entrenched personal value that, every person is valuable And, how we treat ourselves and treat others is reflective of, the value that we need to be giving to each other. So I hope that comes through in the writing.
Well, I think it does personally, but we'll let readers decide for themselves. So if somebody's interested in getting your books, how do they go about doing that?
The easiest method, since I'm in Panama, I've made them accessible through Amazon. Mm-hmm. And they're the Summer Triangle Trilogy and the Winter Hexagon Trilogy. And there are 3 books in each of those series. And there's also a book to encourage young writers called Creative Constellations, which is inspiration for new young writers.
Nice. Well, that's really cool. So, okay, you've got the two trilogies. Is there going to be a third?
Well, I can tell you, when I got to the end of the book 6, I feel it really, I hope it really tidied up the loose ends of that part of the story. But because of the way it ends, you know how endings are really just beginnings, right? Mm-hmm. So it's ended on a note where a lot has changed. And so there is the potential for something in the future. But currently I'm writing something else. And I'll wait to hear from readers again. If readers get to the end and I hear people saying, I really want to know more about Jace and Gloria and their adventures and the things they're working through and what's going on in their relationship, and then I would consider it. But I think it might be a little bit of a break time from that while I write this other work first.
Well, it's good, I think, to clear your brain and write something different for a while and then maybe go back to it or not, but you'll have a better idea of what you want to do once that, you've given yourself some time.
I think so. I hope so.
Yeah, 6 books is a lot. Good for you. What an accomplishment.
Thank you. But having said that, mine are, a little bit shorter and novella length. So that certainly helped me to produce that many. But it was fun putting them all together. And sometimes a little hard to do.
Yeah, well, the challenge makes it worthwhile, I think.
Yes, for sure. 100%.
So how do you think writing with others helped you to get these books finished or accomplished? Well,
just at a very basic level, when you're writing with others, you have an appointment to keep, right?
That's true.
Say, I'm going off to get my groceries now because, you're meeting with people and you've made this commitment. And so the first thing is you show up. And I think for some writers, that's the hardest part. We call that, getting your bum in the seat.
Right.
And I have found that in doing that, it helped me to explore my stories, and it gives you immediate feedback, which is huge, and it's very encouraging. And I would often either take the prompt and write with it, or I would just pick up where I left off before. And, really this ending that I'm talking about at the end of the book, not quite the very ending, but just prior to that, I think I wrote it 4, 5, or 6 times in a writing group. And it just wasn't right. I kind of had an idea in my head that that's how it should happen. And I finally let go of that, and I wrote it differently in my group, and they'd heard the prior versions, and they went, aha, that is it. And they identified it right away, and I felt it right away. So, I think the creative energy, they had been along with me on some of the prior writing. They had seen me, tripping over my words, trying to get that scene, and even though they gave me good feedback, it resonated with us when it was right. And having that immediate feedback was fabulous. So I think that that's a real key component to it. So, you show up, you're part of this creative energy, you get an immediate response, and you are writing, and writing begets writing. So then when you are on your own, you're continuing with it because the ideas don't stop when the appointment's over. And so for me, it helped to carry the writing forward and see it right through to the end.
Well, that's fabulous. I can see how that would work because I actually do write with one of the groups that you write with. But you also are part of a critiquing group. Did you send any of your books to your critiquing group where people are a little less kind and are actually looking for the things that they feel have to be changed?
I'm actually a part of a couple of critiquing groups. One I use for critiquing my short stories and one I've used for critiquing my novellas. And I call that maybe instead of less kind, just a different kind of kindness.
Okay.
Because it's also kind, right, to let a writer know, that section's not very clear because the author might have the whole story in their head and then, the critiquer has the scene in front of them and they're like, okay, something's missing here, or I don't understand this. So clarity really, really helps a lot. I find that critiquers sometimes identify something in my writing. And, the great thing about the author is your choice, right? Whether to make that change. I find sometimes they'll flag something and I'll be like, well, I'm not really sure why they flagged it that way. But they're actually identifying something that's not working in the piece. They just haven't identified the right thing about what isn't working. So it flags it for you. Mm-hmm. And then, often subconsciously, your mind figures that piece out. And then sometimes people are just learning about story and they are actually growing from your work. When they hear other people critiquing their work, they're learning in their story. They need, specific details. They need to include the five senses. So critiquing really has two components. Well, three, I would say. In my critiquing group, we send the work out in advance so people have a chance to read it and formulate their thoughts and responses ahead of time. So that's one part of it. Then we meet together to talk about the piece, and it gives the author a chance to question the critiquer about anything that they raised if they didn't understand something. And the third thing is that authors get to make a choice about the information they're given on their piece. So they decide, was that valid, what the critiquer said? Is it unclear? What can I do to clarify? Or do I need to, show more instead of telling because the critiquers identified that they didn't feel like they were in the middle of the scene. They were being told the story and there was too much distance. And then, sometimes the other thing I would say that authors need to keep in mind is there are some people who are just really harsh critiquers. And I think that's the part that you were identifying earlier about being less kind. That sometimes we just need to realize that, that's where that person is coming from and not to take it personally because it can hinder your work as well.
Well, I think there's quite an art to critiquing. And I like it when I have a tangible set of questions. So, for example, I was counseled once or taught that you say things like, I was thrown out of the piece at this point, meaning that you were reading along quite happily. The story was making a lot of sense. You were enjoying it or not, as the case may be. But at this particular point, you thought, and you went and did the dishes. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, at what point do you get kicked out of the story? And then the author can go back to that particular point and say, okay, how do I keep people engaged, readers engaged at this point? And what was it that kicked them out of the story? And, sometimes it's a grammar issue, sometimes it's unclarity with what's going on in the scene, or maybe it's a voice of the protagonist that isn't their natural voice, if you know what I mean. Like something seems too forced, or uncharacteristic about them. So there's ways of critiquing that I think make it kinder in the process, and there's ways of knowing what is going to be good feedback. Yeah, I don't like this. It's a piece of garbage. Really doesn't give anybody anything to go on. You know what I mean? And it's mean.
Yeah. And I mean, that's part of the training as a critiquer. You know, I often have people who will come in and sit on a critique session. So my one tomorrow morning, someone who's never been to one said, you know, can I come and see like what a critiquing session's about? And so I just asked the writers if they're fine with that. And, you know, my group is really good about doing that. And so I think that, yeah, we have to learn. It's a skill. It's a skill to critique. And it's another skill to analyze the critique. Yep.
Well, Lyndi, I want to, I'm sorry to cut you off, but we're out of time here on Freshwaves. So I have to wrap it up here. And what I would like, again, is for you to let people know how they can get a hold of your books. Can they simply Google your name or go to Amazon and look at your author name of Lyndi Allison? Or do they have to have the name of the books?
They can go to Amazon and put in Lyndi Allison. Hopefully they would come up there. But if they want a list of all my books in one place, they can also go to my website, which is tranquiloretreat.com. And then there is a tab there for my books. And it lists all the books there with a quick link to every book on Amazon.
Perfect. Well, congratulations on the release of your new trilogy. And I look forward to reading it and to all the new things that are coming out for you.
Thank you, Brenda. And thank you for this opportunity to share and for the opportunities you've given to writing community with you. You are wonderful to write with.
Oh, thank you very much. I surely enjoy my writing groups, and at this point in my life, I can't live without them. So, yeah, it's a wonderful thing to write, and we'll be talking to Sue Reynolds in the near future about the actual science behind writing with others, and how we as human beings like the process of writing, and how the AWA facilitators are not therapists, but that writing can be therapeutic. So that's coming up soon on Freshwaves as well. So that's it for Freshwaves today. I hope everybody has a wonderful day and a wonderful week, and we'll catch you again next time on Freshwaves.